I'll stand to the side so you can see me. So, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. And I do want to thank everyone for being here, and I want to thank this great organization for continuing to have this very, very important gathering that you've had now for many, many years. And I've been invited often. I was never able to make it, but I was happy to make it now. And I think that this is like a really serpentitious moment, you might say, to have this conference. When we think of the dedication to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and they just dedicated his memorial on the Mall in Washington. I mean, that is so awesome. And when you think, we have to remember that this is the first individual that has a memorial in his name on that mall that is not the president. And that's awesome, don't you think? I think that's awesome. And also because we know that we now have this great new movement of young people called Occupy Wall Street. How about that one? Okay. I don't know if all of us have had a chance to go in and join in that movement, but I know that we have to put that on our calendar and make time so that we can also, participate in that movement. I was, I guess, fortunate, I'm not sure if we say that, to be here in Memphis after Dr. King was killed. And I remember that march, and I'm sure there's some people here in the audience that were also on that march that happened after Dr. King was killed. And the thing I remember the most about that march is that, number one, how quiet everyone was. It was total silence. And all you could hear really was the shuffle of the feet on the pavement. And then I remember walking through the neighborhoods and seeing the poverty of the people that were sitting on their porches watching the march go by. And then this is something that very few people see, and you hardly ever see this in any pictures, but as we were walking down the street, there were National Guardsmen with their bayonets trained on the crowd. You could actually maybe reach out and even touch them. And in our delegation, which at that time I was in New York City running the Great Boycott in New York, and we had a very integrated group of people that were marching. We were all from California, but working in New York City. And then you could see also some hostile looks as we were walking down that. And then every other block, there would actually be a big tank with a cannon that was aimed at the marchers. This was a totally peaceful march after Dr. King was killed. And we all wondered, why would they have rifles and bayonets aimed at the crowd and tanks? We found out later, some of the people from the Seafarers Union that had brought us here to Memphis told us that they actually had a plan that if there was any kind of violence, they were just going to move in on the crowd and have the crowd crush in on itself. And I guess that really would have put a stain on Dr. King's legacy. And luckily, that did not happen. So we know that as Dr. King stood for peace, and he was assassinated, that we now live in a culture of violence, of total violence. Not only when we think about all of the wars that are going on. I was in the airport coming here, and when the news of Gaddafi's death came out, the people in the airport were celebrating. What about bringing people to trial? No, now it's all about assassination. And that seems that our country now, we've gotten so immune to violence that we celebrate violence. And of course, this is exactly what Gandhi and King were against. And Cesar, I'm going to throw Cesar Chavez's name in there also. It's really interesting that when we think of the word nonviolence, that it's a double negative, non and violence, right? And Gandhi, a man of color, is the person who coined the word for nonviolence in the Indian language, ahimsa. I'm sorry, I hope I'm saying that right, because I often get it wrong. But and the word that Gandhi coined, it meant it was not a passive word. It was not a passive word. It was a word of action, which meant that if you believe in the philosophy of nonviolence, it doesn't mean that you're passive and that you're not doing anything. that you've actually got to be out there and you've got to be working for peace in a very active kind of a way. And it's really interesting when we think of our own English language that we don't have a word like the one in the Indian language. You know, we don't have that kind of a word. It's something to think about. And maybe some of the scholars in the room can start thinking, how can we coin a word that means just no violence, but it means that we have to, in a very active way, work for peace. I think this is a mandate that we have to have when we talk about everything that is upon us today. When we see the violence that is happening in our society, and we have to think about the violence of poverty. This is a violence. When we think that how many people have lost their homes in this country, and people are getting their pensions taken away from them. Workers, their wages are not keeping up with the cost of living. If we had kept up with the cost of living, the way that the cost of living has risen, every worker working in McDonald's or Jack in the Box or any of these minimum wage workers, our minimum wage should be up to over $30 an hour. Over $30 an hour. You know, and this is something that we have become so immune that we just accept this. We accept the fact that we have people living in poverty in our country. And we feel kind of helpless and what can we do about it? And of course, one of the ways that they have been able to keep workers' wages down and keep them in poverty is, of course, through the destruction of our labor unions in our country. And we have to remember, too, that when Dr. King was killed, he was actually working on behalf of the garbage workers here in Memphis. That's what he was doing here. And when he came here, you know, he wasn't feeling very good. He was sick, but he still came because they wanted him to come and he wanted to be here with the workers. And we have seen that the number of workers that are represented now by labor unions has shrunk. And of course, in the South in particular, here where you have these right-to-work laws, which really means you can't have the right to organize laws, right? Because unions cannot get strong. They can't deduct dues. They can't deduct dues from workers' paychecks like we have in California or in New York. So the labor unions are never able to get the financial strength that they need to be able to get the power that they need. And when we talk about, it's not just the economic power, but it's also talks about political power. When we look at the South, again, you know, these are, of course, all of the red states, where people don't really have a big voice in our government. I'm talking about ordinary people, you know, because people are so indoctrinated against labor, against progressive movements, and a lot of people just don't vote. I was speaking to friends of mine from North Carolina, and I'll tell you where I was at yesterday, and they were telling me about an important election that they had in their district, and I think the turnout was about 1% of the people who turned out to vote. And so this, again, if we're going to have a democracy, people have to get out and vote. And I know if I ask this audience right now, how many of you have voted? Let me see your hands. How many of you voted the last election? Okay. All right. Now, I want to ask you another question. How many of you went out and knocked on doors to get other people out to vote? Well, this is better than most audiences. And I know that a lot of you here are activists. But we know that everybody that volunteered to go out there and knock on doors to get other people out to vote, that you probably turned out maybe 40 to 100 people, you know, to vote. And this is really, really important. And we can just remember that it's not just a matter of voting anymore. That's not enough. We've just got to go out there and make sure that everybody votes. People that are fed up with the system, especially young people. It's about 75% of young people don't vote. You know, they've kind of given up. They're mad at the system. But if they don't vote, then we get the kind of representation that is going to go against us. And we know, and I'll talk a little about immigration in a minute, but when I just heard, like for instance here in Memphis, that the commission has voted against giving any funding to Planned Parenthood. You know, they tried to do this at the national level, and they just did it at the local level. And instead of giving the funding to Planned Parenthood, they gave the funding to some religious organization, which may not be on the same page as women's organizations are. You know, I'm the mother of 11 children, but I believe in choice, right? I believe in choice. And I want to share with you, you know, and when I speak to Latino audiences, and I know we have people here that have their translation equipment on, and gracias por venir. you know. But you know, I always remind people, because we have so much of our, unfortunately, in our religious community that are always attacking feminists, always attacking people in our LGBT community. And I always like to remind audiences, maybe many of you may not know about this particular person. His name was Benito Juarez. Benito Juarez. Benito Juarez was the president of Mexico. He was the first indigenous president after the independence from Spain. And he had a saying, and his saying was, el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz, which translated means, respecting other people's rights is peace. And so that means that if a woman wants to have 11 kids like me, but there's another woman who says, no, I don't want to have any children at all, okay? That is the woman's choice, right? If somebody wants to marry someone of their own sex or fall in love with somebody of their own sex, that is a constitutional right of that person. And that person should not be denied their right to choose the person that they want. And respecting other people's rights is peace. What someone else does with their life doesn't affect ours. And when we have these difficult conversations with friends or family or peers, let's remind them of that. Let's remind them of that. When we talk about nonviolence, it also means respecting other people, like Benito Juarez said, respecting other people, respecting their rights. And that doesn't only mean in terms of individuals or families, but that can also be, we can also say that about nations, right? If we respect the right of other people, of other nations, to be able to develop their own economies, to be able to use their own resources. You know, it's kind of interesting when we think about this, but the United States of America, we are the only developed country that does not own our natural resources. Think about that. We are the only developed country that does not own our natural resources. When I was introduced, I was a founding member of the Democratic Socialists of America, which is an organization with Gloria Steinem, John Sweeney, who was the head of AFL-CIO, Alan Lowenstein, Michael Harrington. These are very progressive people, mostly all of them, I guess, from New York City, except for Gloria, who was originally from Ohio. But and people talk about socialism, and it's a scary word in the United States of America, you know? And I like to remind people when we think about socialist countries, for instance, and right now we got this big debate going on in the United States that we are in this huge deficit, right? And we're in debt, you know, and, you know, our whole financial system is breaking down. And then we think about, okay, let's look at some of these socialist countries. Norway, for instance. Norway. In Norway, a few months ago, it came out in the New York Times, Norway had $400 billion surplus. $400 billion surplus in that country. Their concern is that people are going to become lazy and not want to work anymore, right? And where did they get all that money? From their oil. Because they own their own oil. But you know, in California, 48% of the petroleum that we use in California comes from the oil companies, but we don't even tax the oil companies. We don't even tax them, let alone have the people own the oil companies like they do in other countries. Or our electrical companies, or our water, et cetera, it goes on and on and on. And these are things that we don't even think about. We don't even think about. And when we think about this economic collapse, and we think about these people that are in charge of these banks and these mortgage companies that were making, you know, millions of dollars. You know, when you look at some of these people and they get like $4 million, and then their bonuses, and then their stock options, and you think, this is obscene, that you should have people making this much money. The healthcare issue. Again, these socialist countries, they have national health care from the time a person is born, from the time that they die. Everybody is covered with health insurance, right? And in our country, you know, President Obama's trying to get his health care plan approved, which was kind of a compromise to let the insurance companies still stay in the business, right? I mean, that was a compromise that they made. But when we think that some of the CEOs, the executive people of these companies are making $4 million or $1 million, what's that all about? That they can make all of that money just to manage And yet the people then that are going to, or without health care, are going to have to pay to get their health care. So the Occupy Wall Street, that is such an important thing that they are doing, because they are probably, for the first time, bringing attention to what these bankers and these CEOs are getting, and trying to find a way that we can start breaking down, you know, changing our financial systems so that it's like think about this. You know, when you read about us in the papers, what do they call us? Do they call us citizens? No. We are called consumers, right? Isn't that kind of an insult? If we are looked at as consumers, then it's like we are put on this earth, according to these people up there on Wall Street and others, to make them rich, right? That's the reason we exist, is to make them rich. And at the same time, we are treated, again, like consumers. We're not respected in any way, shape, or form. So we know that all of this has to change. You know, when you think many years ago, not too long ago, maybe 20 years ago, what a CEO earned was 40 times more than a worker. 40 times more than a worker. Today, a chief executive officer of a Fortune 500 company earns almost 500 times more than a worker. 500 times more than a worker. So we know that this picture is wrong. This picture is wrong, and that it's got to be changed. And we have to think about how we do it in a nonviolent way. In the farm worker movement, when the farm workers were up against these giant corporations, you know, in California, the growers out there, it's not like a small family farm. One of the growers out there, the largest one out there, is named the Jamar Corporation. They have 4,000 workers. We have Dole, which is, you know, the pineapple company. They have like 20,000 workers in California working in different farms that they own. So these are not any small companies. And yet, you know, those companies, when we started our movement way back in the 60s, they wouldn't even give the workers drinking water. There wasn't a toilet out there in the field. Many times workers will come up to me and say, "Thank you for getting us the toilets." It's good. Women that were working out there in those fields had nowhere at all to be able to relieve themselves. So they would have to get sheets or towels and put them around the women so that they could go to the bathroom. No respirators. People worked from sun up to sundown. And treated, you know, if they complained, they would get insulted. So, but it took the workers to understand that they had power. And when we started organizing the farm workers, people would say to Caesar and myself, "Well, how are you going to organize the workers? They don't have power. They don't speak English. They're migrants or immigrants. They don't have any assets." So what we did is that we did this, the way that we organize, we do house meetings, okay? We went into people's homes and we said to them, "Look, you do have power, but that power is in your person. And if you can come together with other workers, you could make the changes. And you know what? If you don't do it, nobody is going to do it for you. Nobody can make the changes for you. You are the only ones that can do it." And the workers did. Little by little, we convinced them that they had power. And they got together. And they, you know, they had a strike, and then they had marches, you know, and they did fast. You know, Cesar Chavez fasted for 25 days because he was afraid the workers would turn to nonviolence. And the workers would fast. When one of our people were killed, and we had 5 people that were killed, instead of trying to resort with violence, Caesar would ask everybody, "We're going to fast for 3 days." During all the preparations for the funerals, people fasted. And it was really good because it made people strong. And once people understood that, it's so important. And so this is, I think, basically what we have to do. And I like to tell this story during the Great Boycott. I was in New York City in charge of the boycott, and this farm worker called me on the phone. He said, "Señora Huerta, they took the grapes off the store." And so I asked him, "What's the name of the store?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, look at the sign and see what it says." He said, "Señora, I don't know how to read." And I thought, this man who had gone from a little small town in California, farm worker town, all the way to New York City, standing in front of a store, asking people, "Don't shop at the store because they're carrying grapes," right? And was able to convince people not to go into that store. The power of one person who was unable to read, a very poor, impoverished farm worker. So, you know, we know that we can make these changes. We know that people can get together and we can make the changes that we need once we make that commitment. And the commitment is really not that difficult. The commitment is simply one of time, basically. And we know time is precious because, you know, we're only on this earth for a short period of time. And so, like all of you here that have given your time and your resources to be here, this is the kind of time that we have to give so that we can make the changes. And we really, really have to believe in the power of nonviolence. When we think of the changes that have been made in the history of our country, you know, they have been made always from the bottom. You know, the civil rights movement, you know, we're right here where so much of this history was accomplished, right? And the women's movement, right? When they ended the Vietnam War, it was the peaceful people, the peaceful marches. Again, the workers, when they took over the factories, and the farm worker movement, the farm workers themselves, with their marches and their fasts and the activities, the boycotts. And the boycott, when we ask people don't buy grapes, it's maybe a conflict, but it's not. It's a non-violent conflict. And Gandhi always said that sometimes you have to have a conflict in order to make changes, right? You have to have a conflict, but we don't want to respond with violence. And when we think of countries that have been liberated, of course we can think of India, right? Which Gandhi, and yeah, there was violence against the Indian people when they were trying to get their liberation, but it worked. They were able to liberate India through using nonviolence, ahimsa. And the same thing with, of course, recently we saw Egypt, that happened with Egypt. It happened in the Philippines. And there was a study recently that was done that when nonviolent movements, and they compared this with violent movements, 63% of the accomplishments and the victories went to nonviolence, only 23 to violence. But we know, and when we talk about nonviolence, we don't think of it in terms of a tactic. Oh yeah, I'm going to do this as a tactic, right? But we have to think of it as a philosophy, because nonviolence is transformative. And I saw it with the farm workers. You know, when we would say to them, no, you can't respond. If you got beaten up, but you're not going to respond with violence. And you could see that the people themselves were transformed. And it takes, I guess, a lot of faith. It takes a lot of faith, and we have to really believe in a divine power, and we have to believe in ourselves. And we can see how the growth and the spiritual growth and the strength, the emotional fortitude of people grow when they practice nonviolence. I want to mention, well, I think I talked about the violence of poverty, but you know, recently our Latino community, we have been so attacked. You know, brown is the new black, everybody, okay? In case you didn't know, brown is the new black. We have seen, because it's not politically correct to attack people who were African Americans, but hey, it's okay, you can say anything you want against Mexicans or people from Central America. You know, we have been so attacked, you know, in the media, Fox News, you know, O'Reilly and Lou Dobbs and all these other terrible people. And even the mainstream media has attacked us as immigrants. And this is a very important issue, again, when we think about the violence against families. The people that have been deported, when you have, you know, fathers and mothers that have been deported and they've had to be separated from their citizen children, and they have to make that choice. Do I take my child to Mexico and deprive them of the rights of citizenship, you know? Or you know, do I leave them behind? What a terrible choice for parents. And the other thing too is, remember that there was actually a story, and I don't know if many people caught this, and I remember when Mr. Congressman Sensenbrenner, he's from Illinois, or is it Illinois? Wisconsin, excuse me. When he came out with his bill, a very, very bad bill, and now it's being incorporated, I think they just did this in Alabama, that anybody who helps a person who's an undocumented person, and I'm not going to use that word, illegal alien, okay? Undocumented person, that they could also be arrested, or it would be a crime, and all of these other things that they had in there. And we went to meet with him, and we asked him, you know, Wisconsin is not a border state. Why all this interest in putting this bill forward to incarcerate people who are undocumented? They couldn't give us an answer. They couldn't give us an answer. But you know what? Wisconsin is not a border state, but you know what they are? They have a lot of prisons, right? So this whole idea, this whole campaign against people who are undocumented is about prisons. It's about making money off of people's bodies. And so they built new prisons just to incarcerate people who are undocumented. They built 3 prisons in Texas, and one especially for the people from El Salvador. So when you think, you know, people have been coming here, they've been working, and all of a sudden, people are being incarcerated, and families are being separated, and a million people have been deported, a million people. And when we think about when they did this to the Japanese back in World War II, there was probably a little criticism, a little outrage, but it was during the war, so people accepted it. And yet, so many people have been quiet about these deportations and the way that immigrants have been treated in our country. That was wrong, right? And we're still in that position right now where, you know, we know that we have to get legalization eventually. And, you know, we have to, again, when we have these conversations with people that you know, and I would ask you in your organizations that you belong to carry this message to people. Number one, unless you're Native American, your family came from somewhere, right? Your family came from somewhere. And every immigrant group that came to this country was legalized. Every immigrant group. And in our recent history, you know, we had legalization every 20 years. You know, the last one, we had one in 1964. We had one again in 1986. And so it's time now. And well, people say, well, why should we give these people residence in this country? Well, before it was very easy. When many of your parents and grandparents came from Europe, it was very simple, you know, for them to immigrate to this country. Now, it can take anywhere from 14 to 20 years for a person to immigrate a relative. If you're from Europe, it'll take you 3 or 4 years. If you're from Mexico or Latin America, it can take you 14 to 20 years, right? So they have made it very, very difficult. And yet at the same time, people are being recruited. And then we have to remember, what do the immigrants do for us? Hey, if we ate today, I can assure you some undocumented worker was out there picking that lettuce, right? Or those tomatoes, or the strawberries, or the melons. This is what our workforce looks like in agriculture. You know, I'm from California, from the Central Valley. That's where this food comes from. And the majority of the people out there picking that food are undocumented. Or you can go to the fanciest French restaurant or Italian restaurant, go into the kitchen. They're probably from Guatemala, okay? The people that are preparing the food, you know. Or they're taking care of the children, the nannies, or taking care of older people in the convalescent homes, or cleaning our buildings, you know. In the airports and the hotels, who's doing the hard work? It's the immigrants, right? That's it. So when we talk about, do they deserve to be given their residency status in the United States? Yes, they do deserve this, absolutely. And you know, the question that we never ask is, why do people leave their beautiful countries like Oaxaca and Guatemala and Chiapas, you know, Jalisco? These are beautiful places that we go to as tourists. And the question is, they leave because there are no opportunities. There are no job opportunities. And people are not going to starve. They're going to come north. And then we have to look at ourselves, because we, in our United States, we are responsible for people having to be pushed out. Because we have our free trade policies that we go into Mexico, we go into Central America, we go in there with our corporations and our corn, and we put people out of work. We subsidize with tax dollars the corn from Illinois, Iowa, and the Midwestern states. That corn is then dumped into Mexico. Well, the small campesino farmer who only has maybe 10, 20, 30 workers, he can't compete with agribusiness from the United States, so he's put out of work. So you have millions of these corn farmers that then come to the United States because they're out of work. Then we have the big box stores like Walmart, okay? Somebody said earlier it was a violent act to shop at Walmart, by the way, okay? Yeah. Anyway, so Walmart goes into Mexico and Central America, and they put these big box stores, and the mom and pop shopkeeper that has a little bodega, a little store, they're put out of work. So then they're going to come to the United States. And then we have our big maquiladoras. And these are big box factories that make parts for automobiles and appliances here for the United States. And what is Mexico? First of all, they pay very low wages. But in what is Mexico, 80,000 of those workers in the maquiladoras were put out of work almost overnight because they took those 80,000 jobs and they sent them to China. Okay? 80,000. Right there by El Paso. Where do you think those people went? They came over here, right? Now, why do I say that, well, these are our free trade policies, right? But let's look at what we did with Japan and Germany after World War II. With Japan and Germany, who were our enemies, and we defeated them, we gave them our tax dollars to their corporations to make those corporations strong. So we have Sony, we have Toyota, we have Mitsubishi. You know, these corporations became strong with American, U.S. tax dollars, okay? That's how they became strong. Volkswagen in Germany. So we help those corporations get strong to rebuild our economies. But we don't do that with Mexico and Latin America. You know, we go in there and we take over the economy. I call it economic colonization. And by the way, there's a book, I'm sure many of you, or hopefully some of you have read it, called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Okay, I recommend that book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman by, I believe it's John Perkins, okay? Because he was one of those hitmen for corporations that would actually go into other countries and make sure that the United States controlled their economy. And that's, you know, so if we can change our foreign trade policies, and not only towards Mexico and Latin America, but towards all the other countries of the world. You know, there's no reason why we should think that all of the natural resources of the world belong to the United States, right? That we should think of ways to use our technology, our know-how, to help those other countries stand up on their own 2 feet. When we think about our military is spread all over the world. I remember going to a conference once in Cuba, and they made a presentation, and they showed a picture of Latin America, and they showed where all of the natural resources were, the natural gas, you know, the oil, you know, all of the other resources that they had, the mining. And then over that, they superimposed where all of the U.S. military is at. Guess where they were at, right? Guess where they were at. So, you know, these are decisions that our people in government make. And who puts those people in government? We do, right? We are the ones that put them, we elect the decision makers. And then they make decisions that are wrong. They make decisions that are wrong. And so right now, when we look at our government, and we look at that government, 60% of the people in Congress are millionaires. How many of us in this room are millionaires? I don't see any hands. Oh, with one person.
real wealth.
Oh, he's got spiritual wealth. Okay, that's cool. It's worth more than $1 million. But we have a lot of that in the room here. We have a lot of spiritual wealth, right? But we know that, again, maybe a lot of us that have the spiritual wealth, well, we have to get ourselves elected to Congress, right? So that over there in Congress, then we can make the decisions about where our tax dollars go, you know, and really make this mission for peace, you know, this mission for equality, for justice, for fairness, that we can make that happen. We can make that happen. You know, it's not fair, as the occupier Wall Street is saying, that you have 1% of the population that controls such a large amount of our wealth, you know. In California, with my organization, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, which we do community organizing, we are going door to door, and we're telling people that we've got to change this, that we've got to pass a law like they did in the Northwest, I believe it was in Oregon, where they passed a law that they are taxing people that make over $250,000, they have to pay higher taxes. We're saying you got to pay your fair share. How many of us know that General Electric paid no taxes? General Electric paid no taxes. Not only did they not pay any taxes, but they got about $300 million in subsidies. $300 million in subsidies. And, you know, So I'm going to go back to the immigration thing just for a minute. But anyway, we need to get legalization, and we need your help. We need you to write to your congressperson and say to them, and you know, a lot of people say, well, Mr. Obama should have done this, Mr. Obama should have done that. We have to remember, Obama can only sign the laws that come to his desk. He can't wave a magic wand and say everybody should get residency in this country. He can't do that. It's the Congress people, the people that we elect, are the ones that make those laws, and he can sign the laws once they come to his desk. And so we need your help desperately. I know in our town of Bakersfield, California, which is really conservative, something like the South here, okay? You know, we were able to stop an anti-immigrant resolution because we bombarded our city council people with postcards, bombarded them. We had delegations, and all of our city council persons, there was only one Democrat, the rest were all Republicans. And they were all, by the way, Anglo-Republicans. And we were able to defeat that anti-immigrant resolution. But we sent postcards and emails and people to their offices, and we had to put that people-power pressure on them. And this is the way that we have to do this thing. And whether it's for the immigrant rights, you know, for legalization, for undocumented, for the DREAM Act. Isn't that an easy one? That young people who were brought here when they were kids, they didn't even know that they were not U.S. citizens, right? And that, you know, we're trying to get them to get legalization so that they can keep going to school. And when you think of the intellect that we're going to lose if they don't, by the way, glad to report in California, we actually passed the DREAM Act many years ago, and they took it to court to keep it from being implemented, but our new elected governor, Governor Jerry Brown, again, second time around for Jerry, he just signed, not only do we have the DREAM Act, but they're going to get financial aid to be able to go to college, okay? Financial aid. So if we can do it in California, we can do it in Tennessee, okay? If we can do it in California, we can do it in Tennessee. But I can, you know, the dreamers can't do it by themselves. People who are undocumented can't do it by themselves. We need everybody's help to be able to make this happen. And talk to your friends, talk to your peers, and explain this to them about why our undocumented people need to be legalized. And who knows, like the John Lennon song, you know, Imagine, who knows, someday there may not be any borders. We know there aren't any borders for money, right? Money goes all over the globe. There are no borders for goods. They go all over the, you know, they send, like the textiles right here. The South they had a lot of workers in textile before, but now they send the material to China or other countries and India, whatever, and they make the goods and then they send them back for us to buy them, right? You know? So there's no borders for money or for goods, but only for people. Only for people. The globalization hasn't caught up with the people, right? It's just for the markets and for the goods. So we have so much work to do, but I know that we are up to it. You know, all of us here who are here in this room right now, because we believe in justice, we believe in nonviolence, we believe in peace, we believe in that journey that Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez, you know, that they opened up for us, that I think that we can continue on that journey. And we know that that journey is not finished. You know, it's just starting. It's just starting. One other bill that we just passed in California, which I'm happy to report to everybody, is that there is now a law in California that they have to teach people in all of the grades in the schools, that they have to teach young people, it's an anti-bullying law, but it also means that they will be taught about LGBT, they will be taught about children who have handicaps, and so it's teaching tolerance and starting it at the grade school level. You know, this idea that they can divide us, you know, they can use racism to divide us. We've got to make that stop. And one of the ways that we can make that stop, by the way, is just to remind ourselves and to remind others that we are one human family, right? We are one human family. We have a lot of different ethnic groups. We have a lot of different cultures. We have a lot of different nationalities. But we only have one human family. And I'm going to throw this question out there. Who knows, or I should not say who knows, how many of us, or let's say, what is the scientific name of our human family? Okay, a lot of people said it, Homo sapien, right? Okay, and where did our human family begin? Africa, right? And we learned this in the 3rd grade, you know? But we forget this. And so our human family, you know, started out in Africa, went across to Asia. People got lighter in skin, came down to the Bering Strait to the Americas, right? And then one of our tribes got lost, and they went up north where it's really cold, and they lost their color. What do you know? And so now they have to go to the tanning salon or to the beach to get their color back. So if we can remember this, that we are all Africans of different shades and colors. You know, we're all one human family, right? And so we can say to the Ku Klux Klan, the White Citizens Council, those people in the Tea Party, get over it, you're Africans, okay? And if we can hold on to that, you know, and then we know that Gandhi is our primo, our cousin, right? And Dr. King was our cousin. And Bobby Kennedy, you know, was my cousin, right? That we are all related. And if we know that we are all one human family, then we will, you know, stand up for each other, we're going to defend each other, we're going to support each other, right? And then we can get rid of the racism. Because so much of the politics that colors our country, you know, when we talk about poverty, the largest number of people that have fallen into poverty are the Latino community. 60% have fallen into poverty, you know? The next number, of course, I don't need to say, is African Americans that have fallen into poverty, right? And then, of course, the next number is the Anglo community. And when we look at those figures, and we think of the incarcerations in our country, the incarcerations in California, and I don't know about Tennessee, but in that same San Joaquin Valley where all the good food comes from, you know, it's a 300-mile radius right there, they have, since 1965, they have built only one university, University of Merced. But in that same period of time, they have built 17 prisons. 17 prisons. And the private prison corporation, if you want to get rich, good place to put your money. But if we want justice, we got to get rid of that. There is no reason why our prisons should be privatized and why our kids should be going to jail instead of going to college. You know, and we know that who's in those prisons? It's the blacks, and it's the browns, and it's the poor whites. Because if you've got money to get an attorney, you can probably get out. You know, again, this is where our tax dollars are going. Our educational system, you know, in California, we were once one of the top 3, and now we're way at the bottom in terms of our educational system. So, and that's another whole big campaign that we have to do, because our public educational system is being destroyed. And it's being destroyed through the charter school method. Okay, and ultimately what will happen, only the wealthy will be able to go to college. And of course, if we can keep the rest of our public uneducated and ignorant, the powerful and the greedy can keep their grip on our country. We're in a crisis. You know, if we had to take a clock and we would say, how close are we to fascism in the United States of America? We would have to say that we're pretty close. When we think of all the civil liberties that have been taken away, you know, we have more people in prison in the United States of America than India or China. You know, those populations are so much greater than ours, and yet we have more people in prison. You know, so many things have been taken away from us, and so we've got to start fighting. We've got to start fighting again. And I do want to mention one other thing here, and I know we have time for questions, in terms of fighting poverty, I just want to mention this. People might want to look into this. There's a gentleman named, Nobel Prize winner actually, named Muhammad Yunus. Have you heard his name? Yeah, he wrote this book, The Banker to the Poor. Now he's come out with a whole new model, which is called the social business model. And what this is, and I think he's written a book called Creating a World Without Poverty. And the other book that he's just come up with is Social Business. And what he's talking about here is getting people to invest in our communities, especially where poor people live, with the idea that you're not going to make a profit. That maybe you will get a small dividend, 1% or 2%, or maybe just invest with the idea of creating jobs, and putting people to work and taking people out of poverty, but not do it on a profit basis. So I think it's another one of those ideas that people can look into. You know, he also started the micro-lending, microcredit programs, which sometimes work and sometimes they don't work in the United States of America, because unfortunately everybody here thinks they're going to be a millionaire someday, right? So, but there's a lot of great things that I think we can look forward to, even though we know that things are really bad right now. But sometimes when things are really bad, that is when the best of us comes out. Because then we can create more opportunities and think of new methods and new ideas to make our world a better place. And I think that, as I said before, we're up to the challenge. All of us are up to the challenge. And it takes new ideas, new ways of thinking, and maybe new ways of doing this justice fight, but always remembering that we have to base it on love and faith and in nonviolence, which I think is really when you think of what love is, that's what it is. It's a spiritual force. You can't see it. It's very strong, but it means that we love the other person and we see God's creature in everybody that we see. I want to say a little chant, and I want you to join me. And this is a Zulu word from South Africa. The word means, we are coming together to fight for justice. And I'll add to that, we are coming together to fight for justice with the spiritual force of nonviolence. And the word is Wozani. Wozani. So I'd like to ask you to shout this word as loud as you can, so that all the bigots out there, the racists, the sexists, the homophobes, the ageist, right? There's some of them out there too. Okay, so they can hear us. And we're just going to raise this roof, and we're going to say this word, Wozani. We are coming together to fight for justice with the spiritual force of nonviolence. So I'll say 1, 2, 3, and let's all shout as loud as we can, Wozani. Okay? 1, 2, 3. Wozani! That is awesome. Now, I'm going to ask you to do a couple of vivas, all right? Viva means long live. So I'm going to say, Viva Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and everybody shout Viva as loud as you can, and then we'll do a couple more, okay? Just say Viva, but shout it really loud. Viva Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Viva! Viva Gandhi! Viva! Viva Cesar Chavez! Viva! Viva los emigrantes! Viva! Viva la mujer! Viva! That was women. And then we'll say, okay, can we, as ordinary citizens, as ordinary people, can we go out there and can we make the changes that we need to make? We will all do a unified hand clap, and we'll say, as you know, Obama says, yes, we can, right? Which, by the way, he took from us. He took from me, okay? When I met Obama, he said, I stole your slogan. I said, yes, you did, okay? But we're going to do it in Spanish, and in Spanish, it's si se puede. Can we say that? Si se puede. So let's all do that with an organized hand clap. Si se puede. Let's go. Si se puede. And I don't know if we have time for questions or not. I do want to say, I forgot to mention my own organization, the Dolores Huerta Foundation. We raise money, we hire organizers, and we train them. And then we send them into communities, and they meet with people in their homes, just the way we form the farm workers movement. And then we bring them together. And they form, each organizer has to meet with 200 people, and we bring them together, and they have to vote that they want to form an organization. And then we break them down into neighborhoods. And then every neighborhood has to evaluate their neighborhood, the things that they want to change. They have to prioritize. They have to choose a couple of projects, and then they have to volunteer to do the work. We have been able to organize thousands of volunteers. And it has been so effective on the census. In one of our towns, they knocked on 3,000 doors in one day. 3,000 doors in one day. When we were fighting with our congressperson, he's a Democrat, but one of those blue dog, call him yellow dog congressman. Anyway, he wouldn't vote for the health care bill. We were able to pick up 2,000 postcards in about a week and a half, right? Through our neighborhood committees, and we got him to give that vote. Our committees have gotten swimming pools in their towns. They've gotten gymnasiums for the school, passing bond issues. We had another town that had 26 homes that didn't have a sewer drain in their community, and they were able to get enough petitions, and now they're going to get their sewer drain, and it's only going to cost them $50 a family, right? And we've been able to get our people elected to the school board, taking over the water board, and anyway, but the beautiful part of all of this work is that the people do it themselves, right? The people, and some of them are not citizens. We have a lot of people that are undocumented, but they go out there and they do the work, going door to door, getting people to participate, getting people involved. And so we know that we can do this everywhere. This idea of people rising, of people power, it is something that we can make happen, but the thing is we just got to make the commitment and do the work. If people want to know about the Dolores Huerta Foundation for Community Organizing, we are on the web. It's doloreshuerta.org, and that's, you know, you've got my name in the program, doloreshuerta.org. And if you want to support our organizing, we would appreciate it very much. Anything that you can give us, we'll appreciate it. And I do not personally take any money from the foundation, and the reason I don't, I'm very political. I will be out there campaigning with our president, next year probably, and next week actually. And so I don't want to jeopardize our nonprofit status, so I personally don't take any money. And why don't I take it? How do I live? You probably saw in the program there where I was beaten up by the police in San Francisco. Well, we sued the city, and as a result of that, I get a $2,000 check till I die. Every single month. Okay, so I can continue to work, even though I don't really have any other income except my very small Social Security. Because in the Farm Workers Union, we didn't get wages, we just got subsistence. So, anyway. Any questions? Anybody have a question? Or challenge me, by the way. If somebody doesn't agree with what I said, feel free.
Everybody, you ready? Viva Dolores Huerta!
Viva!
Viva Dolores Huerta!
Viva!
And I have greetings for you from your familia in Las Vegas, New Mexico, especially Senor Rafael Babi. Thank you,
Oh,
Lord,
thank you.
for all that you do.
Right. Okay, I was born in New Mexico. I was born on the right side of the border before they drew that line. And we always say to the Latinos, we didn't cross the border.
The border crossed us.
The border crossed us, right? We were here before the border.